that's a sneak peek in what we're going to be doing today. So here's the backstory. There's a chance, say better than average, that we might be looking into potentially buying a camper within the next 6 to 8 months. And this truck came with airbags. I'll mention that further in the video, but I don't really use them that much. I have used them to level out some heavy loads, in particular stuff that's in the bed for payload, and they work pretty well, but they're manual. So it means you got to put the same amount of air in each bag, and it's a real pain in the butt when you want to use it, because I don't have a portable battery-powered air compressor that I can use. I got to plug it into a cigarette lighter, stuff like that, so that's no fun. So I decided preemptively, sure, but I made a decision either way, that I was going to go ahead and put a compressor system on this that will run the airbags, and I won't have to think about it when I need to inflate it. So my thought process is if we get a camper, those airbags are going to come in handy. Even with a load distributing hitch or weight distributing hitch, I see them coming in handy, because God put them on here to begin with. At least you would think there was a reason. So anyway, let's get to it. Couldn't resist. Too much fun. Well, everyone, this is the kit we're going to be installing on my truck. It is the Airlift WirelessOne 25980 compressor system for pretty much any airbag setup for the most part. And why I chose this one is because not only is it have a wireless remote, it's also Bluetooth, and it seems pretty easy to install. Paid about $450 for this. If you want to upgrade, I want to say probably for about $100 more, you can get the more heavy-duty kit, which comes with a different compressor. And honestly, one of the main, I think, features to that is the universal bracket. So the compressor, which is a little bit different, and then the control module will all be mounted as one. And it's on a bracket with some U-bolts. There's no drilling into the frame. But I'm not scared of drilling into the frame, so I'm not too worried about that. We'll talk about what we're going to do with that when I get a little bit farther. But this should work for us, and it comes with pretty much everything. This is the kit. So here's our compressor. It's for the most part sealed. There's some vents on it and whatnot, so I think you need to be careful of that when you're thinking about layout. Read the instructions. I won't go too much into it, but there are certain positions that both this and the control module need to be in to be successful. This is the control module. There's a single output, one input, and then you've got your wiring connector. Over here is the water resistant wiring connector. It's got our ground, it's got our power wire, and then there's a pink wire that is specifically for running this thing when the vehicle is off, but in the accessory position. So explain that a little later. The plastic tubing that actually goes to our airbags. All the electrical connections, we really won't be using these. I'm going to be using the onboard accessory switches that I installed in my truck, because that's one thing about these Rams. The 1500s don't come with upfitter switches, which it seems like every other truck out there does. I think it's only the TRX that you get upfitter switches on, so my truck doesn't have any. So I installed an aftermarket switch controller, which I'll show you. That's not really the basis of the video, but we're going to tie it into that. T's, because again, it is a single tube system, so you need to be able to tee into both airbags. I purchased these. These are stainless steel fasteners, which these are going to be just for the compressor. I'm going to tap these into the frame. Unfortunately, I bought the wrong size for our controller over here, so we're just going to use the self-tappers that came with the kit, and they're pretty similar socket screws. Unfortunately, they're not stainless that I can see, so we'll put some anti-seize on them, give us the best chance, and if I get real tired of it, I will just get some similar but M5 socket screws, and I'll tap it at a later date. I'm not too worried about that. I did buy some rubber isolators just to go underneath this. That's not part of the kit, but otherwise everything else you see here comes with it. I made my own template for the compressor. Why? Because it doesn't come with one. It does come with one for the controller, which helps you lay it out on the frame, but not for the compressor. So I made it so that I could get my screw holes drilled, especially since we're tapping them in the right spot. and just kind of plan it out without having to have everything underneath. And then some wire loom and stuff like that, some accessories that I may need for wiring things in. This is just all my stuff sitting off to the side. But that's the kit, ladies and gents. Let's get to installing it. All right, friends. So yeah, this isn't the most gratifying position in the world, but hopefully you can see. So I crawled under the truck trying to plan out where we're going to mount things, and I think we're actually going to kind of take the lesser of evils. I want this thing mounted to the inside of the frame rail. Sorry for the shadows, but it's best I can do. And really the only really available space that isn't near the exhaust, which this truck has an aftermarket exhaust on it, takes up a little bit more space, but I just don't want it that close, is right here on the driver's side. You do have some fuel lines, brake lines, and both the high pressure and the return line, obviously for the fuel system. But they're fairly well secured. Just stay out of the way of it and shouldn't have any issues. And it looks like everything's going to mount up just fine. So we do have our templates, but I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So I'm thinking about mounting this compressor up high, kind of like right here out of the way. And then we'll mount the control module, somewhere around here. Might have to go a little bit higher. We're gonna have to put a piece of tubing in here and see if I can't loop it down, but there's some space down behind this bracket where I can just run that tubing, because it should be the output side of the tubing should be on the bottom and run straight back to the airbags. This should go in here. I have to look at the instructions and make sure that's the case, but while planning, I'll get this all figured out. There are a couple positions this thing can't be in. Can't remember what they are off the top of my head. I don't remember if it's down, but it doesn't really matter. If I really had to, I think there's room on the other side here. I could probably flip this around and mount it to the outside, which still is a possibility, but this is what I'm thinking right now. And then I got my template. So what I'll do is when I make my final decision, and I won't do that with the camera going because I'm kind of indecisive. I'll lay my templates out, center punch them. Same thing here, we'll pre-drill. I think for the compressor, what I'm going to do is, I'm surprised. I've had trucks off and on all my life, but the frame rails, they're boxed, but it's like a tin can. It's actually not very thick. I guess I never noticed it before. My old truck was so rusted, I probably would have never paid attention. But with that said, I think I'm going to put some rib nuts in here once I drill it out. I'll put the appropriate size rib nut in here, and my rib nut tool will fit in here pretty good. Because tapping this, probably not going to happen. All right, it's just kind of too thin. Tapping it doesn't give anything for it to bite on. Honestly, the self-tappers will work pretty well on this, but you live and you learn. I guess that's the price of a modern-day vehicle. So I'll make my final determinations here, and then we'll get to it. Well, friends, I did not show you, well, everything. Showed you most things, but a couple other things I've been working on. So here's a wiring harness. I have wrapped that in tessa tape. I actually popped out, there's like a pink and white wire, I think. Yeah, the good thing is these are all labeled, so it tells you what it is. This is the compressor power. So I popped that one out. It's only about yay long anyway. And then the rest of this I wrapped in tessa tape, and actually a 1/4-inch wire loom first and tessa tape. And it's running that way. I haven't finished it, but it's headed up towards the front of the truck. As far as everything else, though, we got a couple things to button up. So here is the power wire for the compressor, and that's got to go into this wire here that I put off to the side. So what we will do, I think, is I don't like crimp connects for actual connecting wire to wire, so I'll solder these together, shrink wrap it, or heat shrink it and wrap it in tessa tape. And then the ground is actually supposed to go underneath one of these compressor feet, but because one, I've put these rubber isolators in here, not that they're going to do a whole hell of a lot of good, but two, just kind of because of the way I have it set up, we're going to drill another hole over to the side here. I'll cut this shorter, crimp a new end on it, and I have some star washers, and we will use a stainless self-tapper as our ground, and that'll give us a good ground. So that's the plan, and then we'll wrap this in tessa tape too. So I know it's a lot of tessa tape, but I like things to look factory. One of the reasons why I chose this side of the truck is you can't see it, but over here is one of the factory wiring harnesses that runs on top of the frame rail. So when we go that way towards the front of the truck, I will zip tie that to the factory wiring loom. It's wrapped in the same type of tape. It'll look factory-ish. Obviously this is not factory, but you get where I'm coming from. And then the other side of it is that side of the truck, on the driver's side underneath the hood, is the power distribution module that I was talking about earlier that I installed, that is controlled by those switches. And that way I can run it straight up, and that wiring harness that runs along this frame rail goes right next to it. So keep it all nice in the same spot, and a lot easier for me. So yeah, we got to work around these, but honestly, I'm not too upset about that. But before I do that, we'll go ahead, since this is already done and connected, we will hook in our air supply. So one of the things that they tell you is we're going to use this plastic tubing, whatever it is. Just make sure you cut it square. So they don't want you to use scissors because you could get that angled in some way and then it won't fit. This isn't as big of a deal, but these compression fittings where you just slide in and they pop in, that is a big deal because it won't seat correctly. So really what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the factory edge. We're going to pop that in there, and then if you look, it's locked in pretty good. In order to get it out, you have to press down on the collar and then pull out. But all I'm going to do is just bring this up. We'll move this out of the way for right now, but we'll get it all squared away. And we're going to go right about there. And what I will use is just a good old-fashioned utility knife that's nice and sharp. Come across square, and that'll prep us for this one. But I will come up around this underneath, and let's see how this looks. Get that on the barb fitting. Tell you what I probably could stand to do here is heat this end up a little bit, and I might do that. I have my heat gun sitting right over here anyway for the shrink wrap, so, or heat shrink, so I may do that. Maybe we'll cut this a little bit shorter just to get us a little bit nicer of an angle, and then we'll heat this up a little bit so it slides on a little better. Be right back. Alright, so we're all prepped here. Pardon my groaning, but I am working upside down. But whatever. So I wrapped this in test tape. I got my shrink wrap. Just make sure you put your shrink wrap on ahead of time. We'll get this soldered up. I'll heat shrink it, and I'll get this crimped on, heat shrink that, and then wrap it in tessa tape. And I already have my drill. We'll go ahead and drill here. I do have actually one of the fasteners that was really for this, I believe is stainless, so, or some iteration thereof. And then I've got myself just a couple star lock washers, which will help with the contact on the frame. Incidentally, in the previous part of the video, if you noticed, I put some paint inside the holes that I drilled on here, and then I used anti-seize on the one for the control module. It's just to try to keep rust down, right? Drilling into the frame. Old Dodges, they were, well, Rams, they were terrible with frame rust. I know because I own one. These are pretty good, come a long way, and I don't want to give it any reason not to be. So that was part of the process. Remember, you're working around a fuel line here, so if you're choosing to solder as I am, because I'm a, perfectionist, just remember that and plan accordingly. I don't plan on burning through this fuel line. I don't think it's a big deal. Things get plenty hot around here. Just be careful if the solder drips. You don't want it dripping on you or the fuel line. So I'll just take my heat shrink, which, whew, that's a little warm. Uh-oh. Looks like it might have already started to shrink, but here we go. There we go. That's on. Get our heat gun. Get that one out of the way so I don't shrink it by accident. There. Personally, way better than a crimp connect or something like that. And then I'll test and tape that. And as for this one, kind of the same deal, really. What I prefer to do is we'll slide this one. I hate stingers, these little wires that kind of hang out. So, man, I can't see anything today. I do think it's time for me to get glasses. There we go. So we'll put that in there. And then, fortunately, I can't find my other crimpers, but it is what it is. We'll put it in here. Crimp that bad boy down. Bam. That's nice and crimped. Give it a tug. Yep. And then what I will do is we'll twist this back up. And what I like to do is we'll bring this heat shrink right up over there. Sound like Bob Ross. And we'll shrink that down. There we go. And that, as they say, is that. So, and that gives us a nice, clean, crimped, and covered area. So, again, we'll drill a hole here, and we'll mount that there. And then we'll wrap this in test tape, and what I'll probably do is just tuck it back up under here so it's out of the way. And that's it. So I'm not going to show that part drilling. You've already seen me do some of that. And again, I've already explained how I'm going to ground it. So let's move on to the next step. That'll pretty much button it up here with the exception of sending the air back that way. Okay, so change of plans. I used the self-tappers here, these that come with the kit, and they are an abomination from hell. I don't know what else to say. They suck. So, you pre-drill the right diameter hole, which it says in the instructions what that is. And I'll tell you, these little wings here that are supposed to self-tap, even if you have a hole pre-drilled, they just shred. And I'm guessing this is stainless steel, because stainless is known for doing that versus regular steel. So abandon that. I went ahead and I put another nut cert in, and then I used another one of those stainless steel cap head screws and my star washers and another flat washer, and we made our own ground spot that very secure. It's not going anywhere. So if you're going to use those self-tappers that come with the kit to mount this compressor, because that's what they're for, don't. Come up with something else. So I'm really glad that I ended up doing the nut certs and being a little bit of overkill and stuff like that, because I would have been really pissed off about 2 minutes into this process. So, all right, well, it looks like sometimes my OCD pays off, but in this case I wasn't expecting it. But everything's all buttoned up, ground's done. I've tucked our power wire back in. And that pretty much does it down here. We'll come back down once we get it all wired up, and the last thing that we will do, because I want to move the truck forward and give myself some working room, and I'll probably drop the spare tire because that's where the airbag lines run, because they go straight out the back of this truck. When those airbags were put on, they have Schrader valves, 2 of them, and they go right out to the back bumper. So we're going to remove all that, and we're going to take out that old tubing, and really it's just as simple as teeing those two bags together and running the new line up to down here. So that should be pretty easy. I say that, and that's famous last words. But let's get up the top side of the truck. We'll get the cabling run and terminate it in, and we'll go from there. All right, we got the hood to the old Ruby the Rebel opened up, and you can see where we're headed. So, yeah, I'm hand holding the camera just because it's quicker and easier. That wiring harness we were talking about runs right up through here, and it goes right down by the fender well and right down by the frame rail. So we're targeting this thing here. Let me see if I can pop this without making an ass of myself. And look at that, first try. And this is our power distribution. We're going to run it into the power right here. I'm going to change this over to a 15 amp fuse. I may not keep it here because depending on what accessories I run in the future, this is 30, 20, 20, 10, 10, and 5. That actually corresponds to the factory for this system amperage ratings. So I already know that. It's all documented. So if I add something else that requires a 30 amp circuit, because this only requires a 15, I'll move it over to one of the 20s and put another 30 amp fuse. But I am going to drop this down to a 15 amp fuse because you don't want to overcurrent protect it too much, or you risk the fuse not doing its job and melting wiring because it doesn't actually trip when it's supposed to. So that's what we're going to do. It'll come up through here. They tell you to connect the positive straight to the battery cable and the negative straight to the battery cable. I don't like that. I don't want those wires connected into everything here. So honestly, I could probably just ground that whole thing back at the ground point that I just used, but I'm going to ground it up here. It's basically, this goes right into the battery, so because it's so close. So I'll just use this grounding point here instead of the one down the line here. All right, let me show you what I got going on here. So this is that plastic channel I was telling you about that the wires run through, and what I decided to do is just these clips here, you just pop them loose with a screwdriver right in here and it'll fall down, and then it's only about a foot long, goes up underneath the rocker, and that's where my wires come in. Well, I decided to only take the wire loom that far, so let's go under and see if we can see what I'm looking at. It's going to be kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see it. So here's our wire loom running in there, and then it only goes about yay far in, and then I go back to bare cable. Otherwise, it's running along the frame rail all the way back, basically along this thing here. And I just fished it through there because it was hard to get to. And now, what I will do is where it comes out up here, I'll put more wire loom on this all the way down. We'll run it up here, and we'll tie it into our system because that is right down here. Now, what I didn't tell you, and I probably should have, is I took the wheel liner out for clarity because it's a heck of a lot easier to work. It's a whole bunch of 8mm screws and then a couple plastic push clips, and the whole thing just kind of push it in because it's up inside the wheel well here, but it actually just sits on top of the inside because it's got speed clips, those steel speed clips, and that's what they screw into. Push it all that way, and then it'll slide right out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish wiring this thing up, and we'll go from there. There we go, all buttoned up. So a couple of things. One, here's our power wire. I just terminated it with some heat shrink tubing, but I also tinned the wires with solder, so when it goes into this screw down connector here, it's got something really nice to bite onto. Otherwise the wires spread out, and you know, I just don't think that's a great connection. Maybe it's just me. Otherwise, if you look really far back here, you can see this is the other wire that came in the harness. All I did was heat shrink around it and fold it on itself. I didn't want to cut it dead because one day, who knows, maybe we'll need it. But I don't think so. So it's just sticking out of the harness here, and then our ground point's right here. Can't even tell. There it is right there. So I'm done under the hood. Go ahead and pop this top back on, and now all I got to do, we're going to pull the truck forward, and I am going to run the air lines back. I don't expect that to take me too long, but we'll see. So there they are, the old Schrader valves. So I just let all the air out of the truck just by depressing the Schrader valves. I'm going to climb underneath here and disconnect everything, get everything ready for the new setup. So there's our airbag. I guess I never realized it. I just looked on the side of this thing and it says Airlift. So these are Airlift brands. So it looks like I'm matching things up, at least by manufacturer. That wasn't it wasn't intentional, because these airbags came installed on the truck when I bought it. I bought the truck with like 9,000 miles on it, so it was used. I think the guy might have used to tow a camper, but I don't know. But either way, both lines of each airbag run back to here, and you can see right where they tee in and run out the back of the bumper. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut these right here, pull everything back underneath. I will put the tee in probably right above this cross member, and then run the line back down to our controller along the driver's side frame rail, which you can't see it, but that's about where we're headed. So on the other side of that fuel tank. At least that's the plan. So now all I got to do is get up underneath of these things and see where the tee off on the elbow. I mean, dang, look how close that exhaust is. Again, this is a Borla aftermarket exhaust, a Borla Attack. Also came with the truck, but oh dang, it is tight. Giggity. Well, I couldn't resist giving you one final look. So as we can see, I've run my supply line. It's zip tied over here. And then I've got some abrasion protection. It goes down, runs along the frame rail, and then just hops up over the fuel tank and tees into the airbags. I'm not going to show you the rest of the stuff with the airbags, one, because you can't see it. But just trust me, it was pretty easy. Those airbags are on swivels. The connectors are, so that's good. And I did a little bit more investigation, and that's the Airlifter, I think, Load Leveler 5000. So they're up to 5,000 pounds. No way in hell would I ever think about putting that type of weight on it, but they're pretty decent airbags. I think they go for about 500 bucks. But I didn't pay that, although I guess I kind of did because I bought the truck. Anyway, that's what it looks like underneath. Pretty happy with the way that turned out. Everything looks nice and neat. And we'll see. Anything goes wrong, I'm certain to be updating. All right, so just to summarize how this whole thing is working. I've got my controller down here. I've already turned the air on. It takes a couple seconds to boot up so that the wireless signal picks up, and you will see that on the remote. If you look up in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the wireless signal strength. And right now it's set to 7 psi because that's what I left it at. So the good news is every time the power goes off to this thing, it doesn't wipe its memory, doesn't forget how to pair to the remote. When I started it up, all I had to do for the first time was pair the remote, and in order to get into the settings, just press the up and down buttons, and you can get into the menu. Additionally, when I started it up, it automatically started inflating to what I found out to be was like 3 bar, which is like 100 psi or something like that. Don't quote me on it. But that's because this thing was set by default to bar instead of psi. So went into that menu setting, and you can change the units between bar and psi. And you can also change your presets. With that said, we can wake the remote up because it only stays on for a little bit. Saves your battery. Airlift, and there it is. It says 7. So we'll hit preset number 1, which I have set to 20. And you will hear that compressor kick on. With the truck running, it's not that noticeable. Let's see how long it takes. It doesn't take very long. And then there we go. It cuts off, and it tells you that it's done inflating. You'll see the little arrow, up, down, so whether it's inflating or deflating. Let's go to preset number 2, which I have set at 40, so theoretically should take about the same amount of time to inflate since we've already got 20 pounds of air in it. And we should be getting pretty close. There you go. Now this last one's a little bit harder because of the way I have it programmed. So I'm going to sit this thing right here. And for your third preset, just press both. And it'll go to, I don't know what that is. Never seen that before. All right. There we go. Preset number 3. And now you hear it letting air out down to my 7 psi. 5 psi is the minimum recommended, and that's as low as this thing will go because of safety. You keep 5 psi in your airbags just to make sure there's no damage done to the airbag. And this particular kit It replaces your bump stops on the rear axle. You actually have to cut the ears off that hold the bump stops on. I didn't know that. I actually did a little investigation into the kit that was installed on the truck, and it isn't as easy to install as I would have thought, but it replaces the bump stops. So keeping air in your bump stops, or I should say in the airbags, kind of acts as your bump stop. So that's pretty much it for the setup. See, it turned itself off. Again, it's got a cell phone app. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And there you have it. So it really wasn't that difficult to install. I'd say if I wasn't videoing, it probably would have only taken me about an hour, hour and a half. Took me probably double that, only because I was up and down, underneath, out of the truck, turning on the video, turning off the video, trying to capture some things, and then, it just eats up time. But I haven't completed everything. I still got to remove these Schrader valves right here. I got to put the spare tire back up underneath. Now's a great time for me to check the pressure and clean the spare tire up before I throw it up underneath of there. But all in all, I'm pretty impressed with the product. It works pretty well. There is a cell phone app that you can get. You can pair it with a Bluetooth connection and all your presets. It basically does the exact same thing as the remote control. So there are 3 presets for the remote control. Either way, you can program them. You can either do it right on the remote, or if you do program it on the cell phone app, it will update the module so the remote will have the same presets. Remains to be seen, but I'll keep an eye on it. Pretty impressed so far though. With that said, what's coming up? Well, again, we said we're in the market for a camper potentially, and if we end up buying one, I can promise you there's probably going to be some camper content. I don't know what to say if you're not one of those people that doesn't like camper content. Well, hell, I only put content out once every 6 months it seems, so probably shouldn't be that big of a deal. I wish I could do better, but I've just been super stupid busy, as I always say, so I won't even promise new videos, because half the time I get involved in the project and it's just too much work to try to get video done with the time that I have. Today wasn't one of those days. So keep that in mind, but there may be some camper content, because I'm new and I don't know anything about campers. I've done a lot of research, stayed in one once, more research to do before we make a final decision, but I do know, at least at this point, if I need to tow something or I need to put something in the bed that I need to level out, and I got the equipment to do that very easily. So with that said, thank you for watching. If you stuck with me this long, good on you. I'm starting to sweat. I think I'm going to go finish up and go take a dip in the pool. You guys stay classy, and I will talk to you later.